All right, let me do my announcement thing. Thank you for taking the time to join us this evening for our August 2022 monthly general meeting of the Mesa-Foothills Democratic Club. It's Wednesday, August 3rd, 2022. I'm Mitch Wagner. I am VP of Communications for the club. Tonight, we're going to hear from a special guest, kind of a change up before we dive into election season. Our speaker is Cory Doctorow, an activist, journalist, blogger, science fiction writer, and longtime anti-monopoly champion. The topic is monopoly, the root of all evil. Before we begin, a couple of housekeeping issues. As always, well, I was going to say as always, we're streaming on YouTube, but we're not because I couldn't get the darn thing to log in. But we'll upload it to YouTube later. And if you happen to want to catch it later, just search for the Mesa-Foothills Democratic Club on YouTube. If you have anything you need to bring to our attention or you notice any technical problem or anybody disrupting the meeting, drop a message in chat or message Tina Reinberg, club president, directly, and she'll alert me. Please don't message me because I will just ignore you because I'm busy doing this. One other thing, I am recovering from COVID today. I'm about 98% recovered. You can hear it in my voice. So if I suddenly kill my microphone and camera, don't panic. I'm just hiding a cough. And if I fail to mute and kill the camera in time, well, my apologies for subjecting you to that. Before we introduce Cory, we're going to hear from our club president. Tina Reinberg has some things to say. Tina, unmute yourself and speak, please.
Hi, everybody. Thank you for being here, as always. I wanted to give a shout out to everybody that walked for the primary and the Go team. There are a lot of you out there, too many to mention. If you did not walk for the Go team, it is not too late to jump on this bandwagon. We will be starting again for the general election in November. Also, we have one bit of club business. Rosamund Blevins has entered our lives and would like to be a member of our board. She would like to serve as our assistant treasurer, helping out Jean, which would be a huge help to Jean, and also our secretary, which would be a big help to Meryl, who's currently was previously the secretary. So if everyone agrees, we can have Rosamund join our board as assistant treasurer and secretary, and move Meryl to special events, which is where she really shines. I will entertain a motion.
So moved.
Someone. Mitch, second. Anybody? Just raise your hand. Okay, Rosamund. Any discussion? Any Rosamund, would you like to just say a few words about yourself, please?
Okay, thank you. I got involved in politics. I thought voting was the way to do things, but in that day that orange man got elected, it changed a great deal for me, and I was thinking that I got to do more than just vote. So I looked for somewhere where I could fit in, where I could volunteer, where I had more time, and I spent 4.5 years as chair of membership and as treasurer of the Democratic Women's Club of San Diego County. But I found what I really needed to do is come east and find out where I could help in my community, which is La Mesa. My husband and I have been here in La Mesa for 10 years now. And so I found a place here, and I thank very much the board for allowing me to participate with them, and very much I have a lot of energy. I have good organizational skills. And so I think I'll do what I can, especially in East County. My background is I worked for many years in the hospitality business, and when I got tired of working 60-hour work weeks, then I went to work for the aerospace industry, and I worked mostly with engineers and scientists, which was an amazing job. I am retired, and my husband's retired. We have 3 amazing children, and that don't live with us, which is great. So thank you so much. And I'm going to go back to being secretary. Thank you.
Thank you, Rosamund. So hearing no objections, we have officially nominated and elected Rosamund to our board. Welcome, Rosamund. Also, one more announcement. Oktoberfest is coming up, September 30th, October 1st and 2nd. We will have a booth. We have a team working on that right now, including Merrill and Jean and Steve. So if you are willing to have some time on September 30th, October 1st or 2nd to staff our booth, please put your information in the chat and we will start creating our volunteer list from that. And I think that's all I have. And I've run out of notes. So I have COVID brain, so I have to write everything down if I'm going to say it. So anyway,
Okay,
thanks. I'm looking forward to the rest of the meeting.
All right. Thank you, Tina. Thank you. Next, we're going to hear from Chris Pearson, our club VP for political action. Chris,
Okay.
I'm going to, oh, you're there. Okay, great. Hello.
I'm here. Just a couple of things. We're desperate for candidates. The deadline's August 12th. All the school boards and planning groups in East County need candidates. I just want to bring your attention to a couple of seats that we need candidates for, because otherwise it just gets too overwhelming. The first one is the El Cajon City Council District 1 seat that Gary Kindred currently is the Republican incumbent. It's in Fletcher Hills. We need a candidate. We have a candidate for mayor of El Cajon who is going through the questionnaire process, Arnie Levine, and we'll see what where he goes. Okay, and there we have District 1. Take a look. If you know anybody that lives in that area, that's a Dem that would like to run, even as a placeholder candidate, we're interested in qualifying that candidate and endorsing that candidate. And we have a good coordinator, Zach Bunshoft, for the Go team in El Cajon. So if we could get a city council candidate and the 3 seats for the Cajon Valley School Board, that would be wonderful. The other one I want to bring to your attention is in Santee, Mitch. The Santee City Council Districts 1 and 2, we need candidates. Joe Dolan is a Santee activist that called and said he wants to run. Unfortunately, he lives in District 4 for the City Council and District 4 for the Santee School Board. The Santee School Board districts are 1, 3, and 5. But the really interesting thing about Santee, and a lot of you here, I recognize you as being activists who have worked on Samantha Hurst campaign, is how tiny they are. There are like 4 to 5 precincts in each one of these districts. I mean, it's very walkable for a candidate. It takes very few votes to get elected. All the issues are local. But we don't have none of our activists in Santee have been able to come up with a candidate to challenge Rob McNellis or Ron Hall in Santee City Council Districts 1 and 2, and that would be important, but unfortunately we've come up empty. The other one is the Santee School District, Districts 1, 3, and 5. I don't know if I sent you that link or not, Mitch, but it's basically the same area, small number of precincts. We don't have anybody to run. And I just wanted to bring that to the group's attention. And our president asked me if we could move forward and endorse all of the candidates that have been already endorsed by the San Diego County Democratic Party and the East area. I'd like to read that list into the record and then ask for a motion to endorse. It's actually just ratifying an existing endorsement by the county party. It's not like a primary where we're debating and arguing over Dem on Dem races or anything like that. These are all endorsed Dems. Lemon Grove City Council, Jennifer Mendoza and Allison Snow. Lemon Grove School Board, Greg Shibley. La Mesa City Council, Patricia Dillard. La Mesa Spring Valley School Board, Rebecca McRae and Brianna Costin. Grossmont Health District, Gloria Chadwick. Helix Water District, Andrea Beth Damski. La Mesa City Treasurer, Matt Sterbone. Do we have a motion to endorse? As everybody's muted, sorry, Mitch.
Still move.
Second.
Can you unmute everybody? We can do this by a voice
Well,
vote.
I moved it and we have a second. I don't know who
All
it
right,
was.
do you want to do a voice vote, or I just say, if anybody object?
How about we do hit the raise hand button on chat if you say no.
Reactions, all those in favor, please raise your hand through the reaction button.
We have 12, 13, 14 in favor, 1 applause. And sorry, so how about opposed? If you're in favor, put your hand down, and if you're opposed, raise your hand. And looks like we have 4 opposed. No, 2 opposed.
They're disappearing as we speak.
Yep. Oh, 1 opposed. All right, so I'd say that passed, although I am not the chair.
All right, well, Madam Chair, are we good?
Yeah, we're good. Nobody opposed. Everybody figured out how to turn off their hand raise button.
All right, and let me just say, we have a number of candidates that are pending. Some are on the Zoom tonight, but everybody we listed: Mendoza, Snow, Shibley, Dillard, McRae, Costin, Chadwick, Damski, and Strabone can now all put on their literature that they've been endorsed by the Mesa-Foothills Democratic Club. So that's what we accomplished tonight. And we will have some really nice surprises that I can't talk about, and have an extremely strong slate in La Mesa that I think we're going to be really proud of. But again, I'm not going to beat this into the ground too much, but we would love to get a city council candidate in El Cajon, and 2 city council candidates in Santee, and 3 for the school board, both on Cajon Valley and Santee, because they are winnable. They are definitely winnable. And let me give a shout out to the Padre Water Dam board. They have 3 seats open. If we could get people in there, we could give Susan Till a majority. And we want to get another Dem on to Helix Water Board. So it's not just Andrea, Beth, Damski that we elect, but also somebody on there to give her some company. We're moving along. We're doing good. We're going to have to focus on campaign work, especially after Labor Day through Election Day. It's going to be nonstop. Stay tuned. We're looking really strong, and we're going to get stronger. A lot of announcements after 5 p.m. on August 12th, and whatever you can do to help recruit candidates. Thank you.
So August 12th is the deadline?
Yes, 5 p.m.
Excuse me, Chris, wasn't there a candidate for planning board that we endorsed too? Did you announce?
I didn't put, there's a bunch of them. There's a bunch of us. We're Mirror Advisory, and I'm one of those candidates. I didn't put them on because when you go to the registrar of voters, you basically, to waive all the filing fees and signatures, you sign a form that says you're not going to campaign.
Oh, okay.
I don't want to screw anybody up with that.
Okay.
All right. And anything else to add, Chris?
I'm done. Thank you, sir.
All right, thank you. Thank you. And if you have, if you're interested in running for any of these seats, please let Chris know. Leave your information in the chat, and we'll pick it up. So now on to our main speaker, Cory Doctorow, talking about why monopoly is the root of all evil. Bit of introduction first. Cory blogs about monopoly, digital rights, and politics and technology, and shares whimsical links at pluralistic.net. He previously was co-editor of the blog Boing Boing for 19 years. He was born in Toronto, Canada, and he and his family now live in Los Angeles, more precisely, beautiful downtown Burbank. It says so on his Twitter page. Cory is the author of books including science fiction for adults, such as Radicalized and Walk Away, some nonfiction about monopoly and conspiracy called How to Destroy Surveillance Capitalism. He wrote In Real Life, a graphic novel, and the picture book Posey the Monster Slayer. His latest book is Attack Surface, a standalone adult sequel to the dystopian novel Little Brother, and his next nonfiction book is Choke Point Capitalism with Rebecca Giblin, about monopoly, monopsony, and fairness in the creative arts labor market. Cory comes up from the technology industry. He's worked with the Electronic Frontier Foundation, a digital rights organization, for many years, and he's now a special consultant for that organization. Tech industry monopolies, primarily Google, Facebook, and Apple and Amazon, are highly controversial, but monopoly isn't just a tech issue. Monopolies dominate every industry, from healthcare and finance to eyeglass frames and professional wrestling. So I'll start with a broad question here. Cory, the world has a lot of problems. I made a list just before the meeting. Global warming, impending possibility that we might see World War III from either the Ukraine or the US and China, maybe both. COVID seems to be as dangerous as it ever was and not going away. Monkeypox is getting worse. Trumpism threatens democracy in America. The economy is teetering on the verge of a recession. And this afternoon, I just found out the Batgirl movie isn't coming out. So in face of all that, why should we care about monopoly?
Unmute. Sorry about that. That's an excellent question. And before I answer it, I just want to thank you for inviting me. Also, I will take your thanks for initializing this Zoom meeting. It's not a Zoom meeting until someone speaks with their mute button on, which I've just done. Now no one else has to do it. So I became a U.S. citizen 4 weeks and 1 day ago. I am a member of the Democratic Socialists, and I'm a registered California voter. I grew up in Democratic Socialist politics in Canada, where I canvassed for the New Democratic Party, the Social Democratic Party in Canada, that, among other things, gave us our Medicare system. And was active in Labour Party politics when I lived in the UK. I'm also a British citizen. I've got 3 citizenships now, which seems enough for anyone. But I'm going to see if I can get my dad's Polish citizenship just so I can get back in the EU. We'll see. On the subject of monopolies, I think a good place to start here is with the idea of regulatory capture, which is a phrase you've probably heard, and it makes a kind of intuitive sense in these moments where, you know, you hear about a company whose former executive goes on to work at the FDA, and then the FDA greenlights their product even though its efficacy is questionable, and they make an extra $1 billion, and you say, well, look, you got a fox guarding the hen house, and that makes a lot of intuitive sense. But you have to understand what the origin of the term regulatory capture is, and why it's come to have some salience now. So the term regulatory capture originates not with progressive politics, but with reactionary right-wing politics. It started at the University of Chicago School of Economics, which is also the place where we got the idea that we should tolerate monopolies and in fact encourage them as an efficient form of doing business. This is the birthplace of neoliberalism, the place where Milton Friedman hatched his economic plans, and that Ronald Reagan put into motion, and so on. And the right-wing theory of regulatory capture goes like this. If the government is powerful, then a company will figure out how to take whoever's in charge of regulating their industry and suborn them in some way. They'll bribe them, or they'll, bollock them with endless paperwork, or they'll take them out to dinner, or they'll get one of their executives parachuted into that role. And when that happens, the regulator will take that company and protect them from all their competitors. They'll just make a bunch of rules that say you have to be exactly like this company and nothing like any of its competitors to color within the lines. And that way the company will get this enduring advantage where they'll just become a kind of corrupt arm of the state. And so, and to be clear, I think that's not wrong. But what is wrong is their policy prescription, which is they said, well, because this is true, we should just have no regulation, right? If there are no regulators, if there's no one there to keep the banks honest, then there's no one whom the banks can capture to turn their dishonesty into something that is formally considered honest conduct. And so we can just have a system where the market figures it all out. And 40 years later, we're kind of living in that world. And what we see is that if you stop trying to make the banks honest, what they do is they create robo-signing mills that steal your house. It's not that they act in a forthright manner that is suitable to an industrial economy, trying to figure out how to transition to a green world before we render the planet uninhabitable for human civilization. And so I think that we have to ask ourselves, how is it that once upon a time we made some regulations that are good? You know, you've all eaten at a restaurant without dying of food poisoning. I'm sitting under a reinforced steel joist over my head, and yet somehow the alloys that went into that joist and the bracing that goes into it and the other material properties and the installation of it were sufficiently well regulated that my roof hasn't fallen on my head and killed me. I drive a car, it doesn't explode. My power doesn't burst into flames. My kid has gone to school and not become an ignoramus. So somehow we have managed to make some good regulations. And so I think the question to ask is, what are the market conditions that produce a circumstance in which regulators get captured? And I think the answer is monopoly. Because honestly, we live in a world that is too complicated for market forces alone to regulate it, right? I just rattled off a few of the ways that bad regulation can have a really negative effect on your life. You know, I live under the flight path of the Burbank airport here, where Southwest Airlines flies like 50 737 Maxes a day. That's the plane that Boeing self-certified as being perfectly safe before they started falling out of the sky and killing people by the hundreds. You know, I get on those airplanes, and I am not qualified to tell you whether or not they've fixed the software bugs, right? I need someone else to tell me whether they fixed the software bugs. And generally speaking, that's a regulator, right? When we ask the companies to do it themselves, they do a bad job of it. And regulators do something that is pretty familiar if you've ever worked in science or technology, because science and technology is another one of these domains where we don't necessarily know what's true. You have lots of people who make conflicting claims that all sound plausible. You know, you have the people on the one side who said medicine is dominated by a theory of humors and you can balance them by drinking mercury. You had people on the other side who said, no, we should all be washing our hands because it's tiny microscopic germs that we can't see that are making you sick. And, you know, you as a filth-covered peasant have no way to resolve those questions yourself. And so you're going to have to get some kind of truth-seeking exercise. And, you know, in science, the way we do it is you have peer review, which is like another way of saying, I let people who hate me and want me to do badly in this life point out all the stupid mistakes I've made to other people so that they can embarrass and humiliate me, right? That is what peer review is for. It's not peer review if just people who like you and want you to succeed get to speak. It has to be people who are adverse to you, because it is in that adverse process, that adversarial process, that we get some answer. And, you know, that's how regulation works too. You have the regulator who says, can we teach our kids over Zoom, or will it make them into ignoramuses? And then you have pedagogists who come forward, some of whom have taken some money from Zoom, some of whom have taken some money from Zoom's competitors, some of whom are just independent academics and experts, some of whom are parents, some of them who aren't, and they all come forward and they all give their evidence, and the regulator sits down and they draw up the best conclusions they can. They explain how they came to those conclusions. They have a formal process for revisiting those conclusions if they got it wrong. And that is how you ate your dinner successfully without dropping dead by breakfast, because we had an adversarial process. And, you know, when the actors in an industry are like 500 small and medium-sized enterprises, they're going to be at each other's throats. They're going to have a hard time agreeing on anything. Like, they're not even going to be able to agree on how they should cater their annual industry meeting. But when there's like 5 people who run an industry, when an industry has been reduced to just a handful of companies, well, those people are going to have a lot of surplus cash, because when you form a monopoly, one of the things that you do is you don't have to compete with your competitors on price. So, you know, if you're Comcast and I'm Charter, we can sit down like the Pope drawing up the new world, and we'll say, okay, I'm going to take Charter and I'm going to have the exclusive territory here, and you're going to take Comcast and you're going to have the territory there, and neither of us is going to undercut the other one. We're going to just charge all the traffic can bear. I'm speaking to you tonight over a very low quality $138 a month Spectrum Charter connection, and it's my only option here in Burbank. And they not only have all this excess money, but they can figure out how to spend it. because when there's only 5 of you, you can fit around a table. And if you can't fit around a table, you will. And so what that means is that once you have a monopoly, it becomes very hard to get good regulation. For one thing, if an industry is, run by 5 companies, then to a first approximation, everyone who knows how that industry works for the industry, right? That's why the very good FCC chairman we had under Obama, Tom Wheeler, was an ex-cable lobbyist, and why the very bad FCC chairman we had under Trump, Ajit Pai, was an ex-Verizon lawyer. Good luck finding someone. I mean, there are a few people, Gigi Sohn and a few others, but good luck finding an independent person who doesn't work for the industry, never worked for the industry, who can actually tell you anything useful about the inner workings of that industry when that industry is composed of 5 companies. And so I've rattled on quite a lot, but I'll finish by saying that, to get an example of just how this works, consider that infamous photo of the tech leaders at the top of Trump Tower in 2017, right before Trump's inauguration, when they all went for a meeting with him, convened by Peter Thiel, a tech executive and billionaire Trump donor who wrote a book in which he said competition is for losers. And people looked at all these paragons of supposed liberal capitalist virtue, people who are supposed to be educated and to have progressive social values and so on. And they said, how can all these people sit around a table with Donald Trump and meet with him? And I'm like, well, it's a good point. But isn't it a better point to ask, how is it that all the people who run the internet fit around one table? That, I think, is even worse. Because when we created our anti-monopoly laws in the late 19th century, it was out of the idea that for all the problems government could have, that at least it had the potential to be democratically accountable. And corporations were not. Corporations were, as John Sherman wrote the Sherman Act, they were the autocrats of industry. And he said, if we would not tolerate a king to rule us over, then we should not tolerate a king of industry to set the tone of our lives, to decide how we would live our lives. Foundationally, that was the idea behind American antitrust, and it was that way right up until the same people who gave us the theory of regulatory capture, the Chicago School, convinced Ronald Reagan and every president after him, Democratic and Republican, until the current one, that we should not only tolerate monopolies, but encourage them as an efficient way of making things cheap and great.
Okay, so a couple of points to follow up there. That was an excellent summation. Going back to a point you made several minutes ago, yes, I am a filthy peasant who does not wash his hands often enough, but I thought we weren't going to talk about that in public. How do monopolies evolve? Don't market forces tend to encourage competition and keeping companies small and at each other's throats?
So that was the hypothesis. It was that, well, not quite. So let me give you a quick history of antitrust law. So in 1890, John Sherman pens the Sherman Act. It's mostly like the Oil Baron Act. By the early 20th century, we've used it to get rid of the Rockefeller empire. Wonderful woman named Ida Tarbell, whom Rockefeller called Ida Tarbarrel, was the first woman to get a science degree in America. She became an independent journalist. She wrote muckraking reports about John D. Rockefeller that were later anthologized as The History of the Standard Oil Company, volumes 1 and 2. They are scintillating reading a century later. And they were so good and so damning that they led to the final invocation of these laws, the Clayton Act and the Sherman Act, to strike down the empire. And, for the next 50 years, that was the tenor of American antitrust law. We had this idea that firms and their investors, all other things being equal, didn't really want to compete. That competition, as Peter Thiel wrote, was a great distraction for people who fancied themselves to be kind of special geniuses who, by dint of their incredible intellect and insight, should be allowed to just decide how the products and services we consumed work. Why should we allow some lesser copycat or some foolish mercenary bourgeois to come along and sully my vision of the Model T Ford, right? I created the consumer car that everybody likes. Why do we need Edsel in there? The man's a fool. And every minute that I spend thinking about Edsel is a minute I don't spend making America's lives better with my wonderful cars. So all things being equal, I think large firms and their investors prefer not to exist in a competitive environment. The investors have a different theory. They're not necessarily living in the Ford world of thinking that they're special geniuses. They're just like, if the horse I backed is racing against no one, it's going to romp in first, and I'm going to get a bigger dividend. So both of them have an allegiance here, where they both would prefer, all other things being equal, not to compete. And so you have antitrust regulators, first at the DOJ and then later at the FTC, who set themselves up as kind of referees in a game where cheating is considered to be likely in the event that no one intercedes. And they enforce prohibitions against vertical mergers. So they say, oh, if you can't buy out your supply chain, because if you can buy out your supply chain, then you can you can block your competitors from getting key inputs. So if you're a coal company and you buy the railroad, you can block that railroad from carrying other people's coal, and then you can just sort of romp into first, and everyone else will leave the field. The other possibility is horizontal mergers, and that's where you just merge with your large competitors. This is something that I think we're all pretty familiar with today. Speaking to you as I do a 10-minute walk from the gates of the Disney studios, which are now the Disney Fox studios, and writing as I do novels for an industry that had 20 publishers when I started selling stories and now has 4. I think we're all familiar with what or horizontal mergers look like. And then there were prohibitions on certain forms of predatory and anti-competitive conduct, like predatory pricing. So that's the Uber model, right? You get a bunch of investor capital, you sell a product at less than it costs to produce. No one else can enter the market, and the people who are providing the capital, they just double down. They force anyone in the market out. And then what you end up with is a field where you alone dominate, and then you can raise prices. And anyone who's taken an Uber lately knows that that's exactly what's happened. Your local cab company probably is a shell of its former self, if it even exists. We've lost a decade of public transit advocacy from people who were getting heavily subsidized rides. Uber was losing 41 cents on every dollar it made for most of its history. And now you just don't have many choices. Now you're stuck taking an Uber, and it costs double or triple what it did a couple of years ago. And so the FTC and the DOJ would intercede to block this kind of conduct. And if they saw that a firm grew too powerful on its own, without mergers, without predatory conduct, but if it had market power, the power to set prices, the FTC would intercede and break the company up, which is what happened with the Bell system in 1982 with the breakup of AT&T. And starting in the 80s, starting just before the breakup of the Bell system, we adopted a different theory of antitrust. We adopted a theory that was developed at the Chicago School by a guy named Robert Bork. And those of you who are old political hands will remember Robert Bork as the man Ronald Reagan did not get into the Supreme Court. He had been Nixon's Solicitor General and did such a bad job in his Senate confirmation hearing that they now say that anyone who does a really bad job has been borked. Robert Bork went on instead to promulgate a deeply weird theory of antitrust that said, not only is it prudent for us to regulate monopolies as little as possible because they are efficient and they produce dividends for the public, but actually that's what the laws say. If you go back and you read them really closely, kind of QAnon close, where you just sort of assume that when a politician said one thing when they were debating a bill, they actually secretly meant the opposite, and were speaking in some kind of abstruse code that only Robert Bork can understand, that you will find that America was always in favor of monopolies. Despite the fact that Thomas Jefferson tried to put an anti-monopoly clause in the Constitution, America always loved monopolies, never mind the Boston Tea Party. And that we are a nation that should welcome monopolies. And so 40 years later, we now live in that world. And, you know, I think the proof is in the pudding. 40 years later, investors are very happy to see the firms that they invest in merge with one another. That they don't like competition. And the same goes for the executives. You know, I've been around Disney for a long time. I've worked for them in a couple of capacities as a contractor on theme parks, and you know, within Disney there was always this idea that Disney wasn't Fox, and more importantly that like Bob Iger was not Rupert Murdoch, that they were, you know, bitter enemies. They were the Jets and the Sharks. And then along comes this, you know, multi-billion-dollar nakedly anti-competitive deal to smoosh these two firms together, and it turns out that they were like the Romeo and Juliet, that they were star-crossed lovers, that all along it turned out that poor Bob Iger and Rupert Murdoch were making goo-goo eyes at each other, and that they secretly wanted the same thing. And it just, they've merged these two great houses. What if it turns out that like the differences between Disney and Fox were always pretty cosmetic, right? What if it turns out that they're actually on all the matters of substance, like should we have to compete to buy creative labor? Should we have to compete to get screen time? Should we have to compete to run a streaming service? Should we have to compete when we go before the IRS and argue for tax shifting rules that allow us to operate in ways where we never pay our taxes? That on all of those substantial issues, they agreed. The fact that one of them made The Simpsons, where there was a lovable scamp who said, "Eat my shorts," and the other one made Mickey Mouse, who would never say such a thing and merely mime it, is it turns out to be not a difference of substance at all.
So where do we see, we talked about entertainment, we've talked about technology, we touched on publishing, but talk about some other industries. I mean, you've written in the past about healthcare and agriculture. And
yeah. Well, you mentioned eyeglasses. That's a really good, easy one. So, you know, I use monopoly somewhat colloquially, as we do in the world of competition law and competition activism. Formally, a monopoly is an industry with one seller, right? When we talk about, say, entertainment where there's like 4 movie studios, we still use the word monopoly, although technically it's an oligopoly. It's a much harder word to say. But eyeglasses are a stone monopoly. So there's a company called Luxottica Essilor. Essilor is a French company. Luxottica is an Italian company. They merged. Essilor makes more than 50% of all the lenses in the world. If you've got optical lenses, probably Essilor made them. Luxottica is a company that never really made anything. What they did was they got a lot of capital and they started going out and buying eyeglass frame manufacturers, Oliver Peoples, Bausch and Lomb, Coach, Dolce & Gabbana. You know, basically, if you've heard of them and they're not some weird internet brand, they're owned by Luxottica. But Luxottica also bought every eyeglass store you've ever shopped in. So they bought Lens Crafters, they bought Sunglass Hut, and they bought Specsavers in the UK, and Sears Optical, and Target Optical. And so what they were able to do was go to the eyewear brands that had refused to sell to them, and they were able to say, if you will not sell out to us, we won't carry you in Sunglass Hut. That's what they did to Coach. And within a year, Coach was down 95%, and they bought Coach for pennies on the dollar. And now Coach is part of the Luxottica Essilor family. They also bought EyeMed. EyeMed's the largest eyewear insurer in the world. So if you have your eyes examined before you get your glasses and your lenses, they also got their hand in it. And the cost of all their products and services have gone up 1,000% in a decade. So they basically stole your eyes, right? So that's what eyeglasses look like, and that's pretty salient. It's also salient a lot. There are also a lot of domains that are very popular, but maybe we don't think of as very vital, but nevertheless have a significant impact. So, you know, 30 years ago, there were 25 professional wrestling leagues. Then this like rapey billionaire Trump donor named Vince McMahon bought all of the competitors, merged them into a single firm, reclassified his workers as contractors, just like Uber did, just like Pavilions did with their grocery checkout clerks and their delivery people, reclassified them as contractors, took away their health insurance. And that's why if you're a wrestling fan, all the wrestlers that you used to love are now on GoFundMe begging for pennies to die with dignity of their work-related injuries in their 50s because they're all uninsured. And so that's pretty bad. Shipping is controlled by 4 giant cartels, global shipping. And those 4 giant cartels, regulators for years have been saying to them, hey guys, we understand that you get some massive efficiencies of scale when you make the ships bigger because the diesel bill does not go up linearly with the amount of containers you can carry. But if you keep building the ships bigger and bigger, one of them's going to get stuck in the Suez Canal. And they were like, ha, look who thinks he knows about ships, until we got a ship stuck in the Suez Canal. About 5 major companies run our finance sector, and whenever you see toxic derivatives being minted and greater infiltration into the real economy, the finance economy, it is inevitably because these giant companies are controlling our finance sector. In pharmaceuticals, you have the same phenomenon. In hospitals, you have the same phenomenon. And what you see in healthcare is the way that monopoly begets monopoly. So, you know, I mentioned earlier that publishing is about to do a merger. We're about to see Random House merge with Simon and Schuster, although maybe not, because Stephen King just went to court and said, "Don't let them do it," which was great to see. And their arguments against him were very stupid. I think, objectively speaking, it's quite a moment here. But the reason Simon and Schuster, Random House, and Penguin want to merge is because there's one bookseller that controls nearly all of their sales, and it's called Amazon, and it keeps squeezing them. And they need to be very big to squeeze back against Amazon. And that's what happened with healthcare. So in the beginning, you had pharma doing a series of spectacular mergers as private equity did a bunch of pharma roll-ups. And as pharma merged, as we all know, drug prices went up. One of the people who felt that bite before you or I did was hospitals. And hospitals were diffused. If hospital A wouldn't buy the chemo meds, then hospital B would buy them. And then the hospital A would lose the chemo business to hospital B. And so private equity firms started doing hospital roll-ups as well. And you had the hospitals defensively merging into big chains that then turned around to pharma and said, we're not going to pay those prices. But then hospitals, now being concentrated, turned around, licked their chops, and said to the insurance companies, guess what? The price of insuring someone in a hospital is going up and up and up. And so the insurers merged. And you ended up with a kind of monopoly right through the supply chain, with two exceptions. So at one end of the supply chain, you have the workers, right? You have doctors, nurses, and other healthcare workers. They are paid less and work under worse conditions than they have in decades. At the other end, you have the patients. Again, disorganized, atomized, not able to work as a group. We pay more and get worse outcomes than we have in decades. And in the middle, you have a bunch of giants who do collude with one another, but who also compete with one another, mostly to see how they can shift a few balance points from one side of the ledger to the other. The one thing they all agree is that workers should be paid as little as possible and customers should be charged as much as possible. And on those points, they will never have our back.
Yeah, there was a very sobering article that ran in The Atlantic recently that keeps sticking with me, that cites a study by a researcher named Jacob Bohr, who said that if the United States had a healthcare system that was simply average for developed countries, not the best, not the worst, just dead middle, we would have 1 million people who died in 2021 would be alive today. So I keep thinking about that since I read that a few weeks ago.
Well, getting back to effective regulation, right? How can you have an expert proceeding in which you look for the truth if all the people who speak with the most authority, because they provide the services, all agree that up is down, white is black, and left is right, and that patients are better served by monopolies?
Okay, good. Yes, we have Gene Mullally, my colleague on the board, is doing the digital equivalent of waving his hand in the air and going, ooh, 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 because he has a couple of really good questions here. First of all, how are they? Go ahead, Cory. You can read as well as I can.
Yeah, I'm reading them myself. This great U.S. Treasury report, and I thought for a second that it was a 1922 one. I was like, "Ooh, that's a deep cut," but no, this is from this year. So I mentioned that for 40 years there was this new orthodoxy, this Borchian orthodoxy, that monopolies were good and that regulators should be very careful not to break up monopolies because mostly what they did was benefit consumers. And this is a really key point of the pro-monopoly movement, is to have us reconfigure ourselves as consumers and not as participants in society, not as citizens, not as workers, just as consumers. So long as prices go up, down rather, it doesn't matter if your pay is going down or if your town is disappearing beneath your feet, because your prices went down and you as in your consumer, with your consumer hat on, that's all you care about. And so this consumer welfare standard ruled the roost for 40 years. It ruled here in the US. It was also successfully exported through the neoliberal revolution of the late 70s and early 1980s. Margaret Thatcher loved it. Helmut Kohl in Germany helped make it European policy. In Canada, where I grew up, we had Brian Mulroney adopt it. And then in Chile, you had Augusto Pinochet, the murdering dictator backed by the US and by the UK, who brought it in to replace Chilean law. So it really ended up all over the world. And that was how it went for 40 years. And then 5 years ago, I mean, there were rumblings, right? There were heterodox, unorthodox economists who disagreed, but they were in the wilderness for 40 years. And then 5 years ago, third-year law student at Yale named Lena Khan wrote a Yale Law Review paper called Amazon's Antitrust Paradox. And it was a reply to Bork. Bork's seminal book is called The Antitrust Paradox. She wrote a book called a law review paper called Amazon's Antitrust Paradox, which again, I recommend to you, like Tarbell's History of the Standard Oil Company. It is a sprightly and delightful read. Like, this is not a slog. And she comprehensively demolished the arguments of Robert Bork and showed that you cannot consider consumer welfare in isolation from political consequences of monopoly and labor consequences. And the reason that is so important, law review articles are good or bad. They sometimes get popular, they sometimes don't. The reason that's so important is this woman who was a third-year law student 5 years ago is now the chair of the FTC. And personnel are policy. Lena Khan is, I think, the most salient progressive political appointee in at least 20 years. Far more than anyone Obama appointed or Clinton. She is a force of nature. She is stone brilliant. She has figured out where the levers of power are and she's yanking on them. And she has a posse. So Robert Cantor, who's at the DOJ, is running the antitrust side for them. And Robert Cantor gave a hell of a speech where he talked about this thing that Jim Comey used to do when he was with the Southern District of New York federal prosecutors, where he would gather up his prosecutors, his young prosecutors when he took a new job, and he would say, "Who among you has never lost a case?" And they would all very proudly stick their hands up and say, "I've won every case I brought." And he said, "You guys are the chicken shit club because you don't take hard cases. You just take the cases where you know you can railroad people. You don't go after powerful people who are committing great sins. You go after penny ante thieves who are committing minor transgressions that you know you can stick in prison." And so Robert Cantor, who's running the DOJ FTC, said, "We were the chicken shit club. I remember during the Microsoft antitrust, when they overturned the Microsoft antitrust decision, my friend Dan Gilmore, who was the star columnist on the San Jose Mercury News, the paper of record for Silicon Valley, I was having a drink with him and he was spitting angry, literally spitting. And he said, "Do you know that they just blocked a merger of two super premium ice cream brands? Super premium ice cream isn't even a category. It's something some jerk made up in a marketing department. Microsoft has 95% of the operating system market, and they're letting them walk. That's the chicken shit club." And Cantor says, "No more chicken shit club." And they are bringing real cases. And then in the White House, you have Tim Wu, who I'm biased by because I grew up with him in Toronto. I've known him since I was 9 years old. We used to play Dungeons and Dragons together. And Tim, you may have heard of because he's the guy who coined the term network neutrality. He's a Columbia law professor. He served in the FTC under Obama. He is now in the White House as the tech antitrust czar. And one of the things that he does is chair a committee of, I believe, 18 different federal agency heads who gather periodically to decide how they are going to put an antitrust agenda in every area. So how will the Department of Agriculture address the monopolization of our seeds by Bayer Monsanto and of our ag tech by companies like John Deere? And they are building these joined up cross division strategies that work one on top of the other with an explicit goal of blunting corporate power so that they can regulate well, so that they can avoid capture, because they know that if it's just them alone against 5 very powerful corporate executives who all tell the same lie, that they're never going to get anywhere. So Tim, last summer, a year and 2 weeks ago, wrote the Biden executive order on antitrust. And it was a 72-point order showing that laid out 72 actions the administrative branch would take. And they're on track to compete all of them. They haven't stumbled on any of them. And they were incredibly specific and interesting. There were things like that we will use our authority under this like 1875 law to do this really specific thing to the meat packing industry that will force them to stop doing this other horrific thing to cattle ranchers. It was really clear that they spent a lot of time talking to very deep nerds who campaign on these issues, who have just been, for the years, just been reading the law books and figuring out what the president could do if he had the chance, right? All those transition memos that get written every 4 years or every 8 years, that they'd combed through them and found them. And they just, as I said before of Lena Khan, they had located a bunch of levers of power in the basement of the White House, and they went and yanked on all of them. So this is a seminal moment. There's a lot of stuff that's terrible right now. There's a lot of stuff that's on fire. There's a lot of stuff that has me very worried and very upset. And just like you, I struggle to fall asleep at night. But this part is the thing that gives me hope.
Okay. Always good to have hope and optimism, particularly in these times. By the way, I want to belatedly say that people should, other than anybody who has a question or comment to make about what Cory's been talking about, should by all means do leave it in the text chat. Anyway, I want to talk about a little bit about something else that you've written about extensively, which is right to repair. Is that an antitrust issue also? And explain that also, please.
Yeah, it is. It's an antitrust issue. Well, it's a competition issue because it's about blocking a competitor. So if I make a tractor or a phone or a car and I can stop you from getting it fixed by a third party, then I get to decide which parts you're going to use, so I can charge whatever markup I want on the parts that you're going to have to use. And more importantly, I get to decide when you have to throw it away and buy a new one. And Tim Cook, who's the guy who runs Apple, he gave us an investor note at the start of 2019 where he said, one of the challenges on our horizon is that people don't want to throw away their phones and buy new ones every year. And instead, they're choosing to get them fixed. Now, the salient thing about Tim Cook having said that in 2019 is that in 2018, Apple led a coalition that defeated 18 right to repair laws in 18 states across the US, laws that would have forced Apple to stop impeding independent repair technicians who want to do routine repairs like battery and screen replacements on their phones. So this is really important. And it's important, as a matter of justice and equity, right? It's yours. You should be allowed to use it as you want. It's important in terms of e-waste because if a phone is not fixed, it ends up being offshored to the global south, where it is disassembled for its conflict minerals under really adverse labor conditions, very unsafe labor conditions. And that's the best case scenario. I gave testimony on this to the U.S. Copyright Office, and I'll explain why they're salient to this in a minute. Back in 2018 with the Surfrider Foundation, and they delivered, sphincter tightening statistics about how much e-waste ends up in our oceans. It's also important because repair is often a matter of survival, especially under adverse conditions. So let's take the tractor right to repair issue, which is one that's gotten a lot of ink, rightly so. Our agribusiness is concentrated into just a couple of hands. John Deere is the most prominent one. And historically, John Deere took the position that farmers were actually really good at fixing their tractors. They used to have field engineers who would go around and interview farmers and have a look at how they had modified their tractors to suit the specific agricultural needs of different contexts. Because, farmers are long accustomed to fixing and improving the things that they use on their farms. Because, when you're at the end of a lonely country road and there's a storm coming in and you got to get the crops in, you're not going to wait 3 days for the blacksmith to come up from town and fix your agricultural implements. You're going to have to get them on the road yourself, right? It's a matter of survival. I lived in the UK for many years, and there's this great open air museum, like a pioneer village, except they didn't have pioneers, so it's like a Victorian village. It's called Beamish. It's the largest open air museum in the UK, and they literally saved a Victorian coal town and an Edwardian high street. And then they have a farmhouse with Roman foundations that has been the farmhouse is built on foundations that go back 2,000 years. And there's a forge in this farmhouse, because for as long as we've had agriculture rather, farmers have fixed their own stuff. And it comes with the territory. So that was John Deere's historic position. Today, John Deere's position is farmers are fumbling yokels who should not be allowed anywhere near the internal workings of their tractors. And they use something called Vin Locking to prevent farmers from fixing their own tractors. So if you're a farmer, you have a tractor and you probably have some parts as well, especially for the things that break down frequently. And so when something breaks on your tractor, you go and you swap the part. And at that point, you would think that the tractor would work, but it doesn't. Because microcontrollers are very cheap, notwithstanding this momentary supply chain blip that we're living through, John Deere has started to take the subcomponents in its tractor engines and add a microcontroller to it that does a cryptographic handshake with the tractor that basically says, was I installed by the manufacturer? And if the tractor says no, then it says, don't use me. And so, so long as that's the case, the farmer has to pay $200 and wait 24 hours or more for an authorized technician to come out and type an unlock code into the console of the tractor, which then blesses the part and the engine then recognizes it. This is called VIN locking because it started in the automotive industry, where you see parts that are locked to the VIN, the vehicle identification number, but it's now permeated phones and ventilators and all kinds of other technologies, including tractors. And so this is a matter of national security, because now our agricultural supply is contingent on John Deere being willing and able to fix tractors, to bless the repairs of tractors that other people have undertaken. We saw in at least one example where all of the dealers who lived near one farmer refused to fix his tractor because he had gone to Congress to complain about how unfair this process was. And so it also becomes a way to not just control how farmers operate their farm equipment, but also what they say about it, what our public discourse about it looks like. And one important thing to note here is that the tractors aren't free. The farmers are paying hundreds of thousands of dollars for these tractors. And you may have heard the old saw, if you're not paying for the product, you're the product. But these farmers paid for the product. The thing that determines whether you're the product is not whether you're paying for the product, it's whether the company faces so little competition that they think that they can get away with treating you as the product. So this is a big deal when we're talking about tractors. It's a big deal when we're talking about phones. It's the biggest deal of all, I think, when we're talking about ventilators. And almost all the ventilators in the world are made by one company. We have a monopoly problem. That company is called Medtronic. Medtronic is able to corrupt the laws. And so one of the ways that Medtronic has done that is they undertook the largest reverse merger in history. This is where it's called a corporate inversion. This is where they had a tiny dormant Irish company nominally purchase them so that they could cease paying taxes. And Medtronic uses VIN locks on their workhorse ventilators that are in hospitals all around the world. So what that means is that if you're a hospital technician and you take a donor screen from a busted ventilator and swap it into a working ventilator with a busted screen, you got to wait for the Medtronic repair person to come and type an unlock code into your ventilator. Well, that's terrible at the best of times, because even more life or death than whether the farmer can bring in the crop when there's a hailstorm on the way is whether the doctor can put you on a ventilator when your lungs stop working. And so hospital technicians, like farmers, have been accustomed for many years to fixing their own stuff. This was a huge imposition on them when it arose. But then when the pandemic kicked in and suddenly we needed every ventilator we could get, and the planes weren't flying, and Medtronic's technicians didn't want to leave their house, it became a really serious problem. And finally, we got a solution to it, which is that there was a Polish ex-Medtronic engineer who had kept the device that was used to generate these unlock codes. He reverse engineered it. He burned these little, they're called FPGAs. They're microchips that you can program. He burned them so that they could, with the code to generate the unlock codes, so that anyone could unvinlock their fixed ventilator. And then he just grabbed whatever enclosures he had lying around, table lamps and clock radios and guitar pedals, and he just built them in and he mailed them to hospital technicians around the world so they could keep their ventilators working. But we don't know his name. And the reason we don't know his name is what he did was a felony. In the US and then in the EU, thanks to the US Trade Representative's pressure, we have made it a felony punishable by a 5-year prison sentence and a $500,000 fine to bypass one of these digital locks. That's according to Section 1201 of the Digital Millennium Copyright Act, which is why I was at the Copyright Office talking about right to repair, because it turns out that the major tool that all of these firms use to stop a competitor from just making a tool that can bypass their VIN locks is the threat of a 5-year prison sentence if they get caught doing it. And so what this means is that this takes place entirely in the shadows. And that is dangerous in its own way, because although this continues to go on, there's lots of farmers around the world who've installed new firmware on their tractors that comes from Ukrainian programmers. Nobody knows who they are. Again, they maintain their anonymity because they don't want to face criminal prosecution. And no one knows what's in that software. So far, so good. It's worked great. But what if it's got a back door? What if someone can use it to remotely shut down all of our agricultural fleet because no one was able to inspect it and it was made anonymously, and it's the equivalent of a dirty needle that we found on the street? Where is the harm reduction here? And so this is definitely a competition issue, and like all competition issues, it redounds to every part of your life.
Okay. All right. I guess that would do it on that topic. We discussed one other topic in email. I think we both agreed to it. And that has to do with social media. You and I are both very active on it. We're, I think, active in similar ways. We post a lot of links to other stuff and various bizarre found media that we find lying around. I've been kind of struggling myself lately with the role that social media has been playing in my life. And I'm wondering what your thoughts are on that. Not my life, I'll figure that out for myself, but for your own life and also for society at large.
Yeah, it's a great question. I mean, again, I think there's plenty wrong with social media, but monopoly's not helping. So if you think about the task that Mark Zuckerberg has set himself, he has basically said, we're going to enclose the web within Facebook. We're going to enclose the internet within Facebook. We're going to capture the whole internet and put it inside our walled garden. And then we will pay an army of moderators to decide what is and is not acceptable speech. And the idea that you can build a 3-ring binder of policies so thick that it can encompass all the correct ways to moderate the conduct of 3 billion people speaking 1,000 languages in 150 countries, it's wrong on its face. I mean, I happen to think that Mark Zuckerberg is uniquely bad at his job, but I also think no one should have his job. I think that we all understand that there are local norms and that there are local conventions to how we speak and how we conduct ourselves with one another, much of it unspoken, and that within communities, we make a moment-to-moment, day-to-day evolving set of de facto policies about who can talk to whom and in what way. And I think that one of the things that is wonderful about technology in respect of this antitrust stuff is that because computers are flexible in a way that other technologies aren't, it's a complicated computer science idea, but we really know only how to make one computer, the universal Turing machine, and it can run all the programs that we can write. And so all of our computers can run all of our programs. When your iPhone won't run an app that didn't come from the App Store, it's not because it can't, it's just because it won't. It's been programmed to be disobedient. We don't know how to make it incapable. And what that means is that we can always add a new program to an existing one to add new functionality, even if the company that made it doesn't like it. You can always jailbreak your printer to take third-party ink. The thing that stops you is not the fiendish complexity of the technology that HP or Epson have put in there to stop you from doing it. It's the threat of prosecution under Section 12(1) of the DMCA. That's what keeps people locked in. And so what that points to is the possibility that we could open up Facebook, that we could make, or other social media platforms, that we could allow people to host their own communities that exchanged messages with Facebook, that were federated with Facebook, but where they had their own moderation policies. If you thought that Donald Trump should have been kicked off the day he said, when the looting starts, the shooting starts, you can block that. If you're a community of racialized people who keep getting suspended from Facebook for using racial epithets in discussing how people have discriminated against you or used hateful language towards you, you can have a community where the N-word is okay and you are allowed to say it because all of you have decided that that's legitimate for you. Facebook might block some of those messages on the way into Facebook because they think that it's not legitimate, and you might block some of those messages that are coming out of Facebook because you think they're not legitimate, but you can have locally self-determined rules about how you're going to talk, and you can make federations with other people who agree with those rules. And, all of that sounds very abstract, but it's actually the subject of a federal legislation, the Access Act, that's part of the big package of antitrust bills that have been entered in at Congress. It's also new European law under the Digital Markets Act, although they're starting with messaging. They've said that social media is also on their way.
Okay, great. So I think we're going to start to wrap up here. I'm going to once again ask anybody who has any questions or comments for Cory about antitrust, about social media, about technology, about his science fiction, to just drop a message in the chat. And while I'm keeping one eye on that, I'll ask Cory, do you have anything finally you want to add at this point?
No, I think we've covered a lot here. I mean, I guess what I would say is don't let the fact that don't become a nihilist. Don't let the fact that when corporations are concentrated, they can distort our rulemaking, our lawmaking, our very ability to know the truth. Don't let that convince you that the truth is unknowable. We can make stuff. We can build stuff. We have built stuff, and we can do it effectively. We can make rules that are good rules. We can regulate things in good ways. It is possible to know, if not the best way, at least a better way to do things. And just the fact that you have a referee does not mean that the referee is corrupt. And if the referee is corrupt, the answer is not to get rid of the referee. It's to change the structures so that the referee cannot be corrupted again.
Great. That's a hopeful and optimistic note. So tell folks what you're working on these days and where they can find you.
Sure. I write when I'm anxious, so I have 8 books coming out. The first of them is a nonfiction book I wrote with my colleague Rebecca Giblin called Choke Point Capitalism. It's about how monopoly affects creative labor markets and why giving more copyright to creators who operate in these monopolized spaces does them no good. It's like giving your bullied kid more lunch money. It doesn't make the bullies leave them with more money. The more money you give your kid, the more money the bullies are going to take. And the more copyright we give creators, the more copyright is non-consensually extracted from them by contract when they make a record or make a movie or publish a book. And so we need other thinking, including trade unions and other forms of action to make a difference. And we lay out about 30 really significant policy prescriptions that can be enacted at different levels of government and also by professional institutions, startups, and technologists, as well as fans and individual artists. My next book is a cryptocurrency heist novel called Red Team Blues. It's a book about a Silicon Valley forensic accountant, kind of a hard-boiled detective story, who in the process of running down the stolen keys that unlock a cryptocurrency network does a lot about the economics of financialization and the corruption that it attends. And then I've got a whole bunch more novels and nonfiction books and fiction books coming out. I'm finishing a book now for Verso on interoperability called Seize the Means of Computation, a big tech disassembly manual. And I'm about to hit the road for these books and for Electronic Frontier Foundation, where I continue to serve as a special advisor. And so I'm going to be in lots of different places, although not Comic-Con this year. I'll probably be there next year. And I don't think I've got anything else coming up in San Diego, alas. But maybe I'll be down at Mysterious Galaxy. You never know.
Yeah, that would be great. It would be great to see you again in person. And people can find you on social media and the internet. Where?
Yeah, so I'm Doctorow on Twitter, and if you go to pluralistic.net, I write these essays / blog posts, usually one a day. Some days I miss a day. I spent the whole day today getting my new US passport, so I didn't write anything. But if you go to pluralistic.net, you can find all the ways to read it. It's published simultaneously as a Twitter thread, a Mastodon thread, a Tumblr post, a Medium post. It goes out as a newsletter with no tracking or ads. And it also goes on a website, pluralistic.net, which is a blog that has RSS and all the traditional ways of getting blog posts. And again, there's no trackers or ads. I don't even know how many people read it because I don't even look at the logs. So it is a surveillance-free piece of media in the old school.
Okay. Thanks, Cory. Have a good night. And thank you for joining us.
All. Thanks. Good night.
All right. Good night. Good night. So now it's time to pass the virtual hat, contribute to the club. If you have not paid up your membership, please do so. And you can make and if you can make an additional contribution, please do that. Your contributions help us bring you programming like this, in-person meetings when we return to that again, which I, for one, am looking forward to very much. And also, most importantly, help elect Democrats and advance progressive policies. You can contribute at this URL that I just dropped in the chat. Or just go to the website, Mesa-Foothills Democratic Club.com, and click on the Become a Member / Contribute link at the top of the page. And now we're going to make time for local leaders to talk about things that are important to know about. Please raise your hand. Don't raise your hand physically, because I can't see that. Just use the raise your hand reaction on Zoom, or leave a message in the chat and we'll call on you and give you the floor for a minute or so. We're going to start with fellow board member Steve Jasianka, whose name I have no doubt mispronounced because I always do. And he's going to talk to us about Oktoberfest. Steve, I am ready for you to go.
Hi, hello everybody. Steve Yashanka here. Oktoberfest right around the corner, and we need you. We need all hands on deck. Everybody knows this is a mid-election year. A lot of people running for office, running for re-election. I put some information in the chat already. This year, Merrill Perry, Jean Mullally, and myself, we're all co-organizing it. I put Merrill Perry's email address in the chat and mine. Please email us. Phone numbers, I saw one. It would be easier for us to get emails, and then we'll compile the list of what is what. Important dates, please block out this time now. 3 days, Friday, September 30th, 4 p.m. to 10 p.m. Saturday, October 1st, 10 a.m., 10 p.m. Sunday, October 2nd, noon to 8 p.m. They always estimate, and in years past, there's been for all 3 days over 100,000 people altogether at Oktoberfest. We don't know exactly where we'll be. We never know exactly where we'll be until just before Oktoberfest happens. But usually 99.99% of the time, we're on the East End, the intersection of 4th Street, Allison Avenue, and La Mesa Boulevard, all the way on the East End near where the rides are and a food court. Tell your family, tell your friends. Again, this is an election year, midterm elections, and you know the bad guys are out there, the Trumpers, the QAnon far-right groups and all that. So we're gonna need your brains for talking points. We will be registering voters. We always do. We register any voters, no matter who they are or what party. We need you. Please take down these email addresses and let us know. Thanks a lot. Hope to see you then. Bye-bye now.
Thank you, Steve. So next up, we have Andrea Beth Damski.
Thank you, Mitch. Hi, everyone. I am Commissioner Andrea Beth Damski. My pronouns are she, her, hers. I'm a candidate for Helix Water District Director, Division 2 on the November ballot. I want to thank this club for your endorsement, and I'm excited to announce that I'm also endorsed by our county party at its July Central Committee meeting. I have some important campaign updates. I've received some labor endorsements in recent weeks from UA 230, plumbers and steam fitters, Iron Workers Local 229, and IBEW 569, International Brotherhood of Electrical Workers. Last week, I pulled my papers at the county registrar's office, and so did someone else. So here's the news. Not the current director, who I've been expecting to pull papers to run again, but another opponent, a Republican who ran in 2010. I got 27% of the votes by doing nothing but posting signs. So in this race, ground game will be essential, and I look forward to your help and support in getting the word out. My campaign launch on July 23rd was successful and fun. I greatly appreciated Jean and Rosamund for bringing the sound system and operating it and providing good music, great mood music. Another fundraiser is in the works. For those who couldn't attend, I look forward to seeing you there. Again, thank you for your support. I'm Andrea Beth Damski, candidate for Helix Water District Division 2. Thank you.
Thank you, Andrea Beth, and the club members should thank me for not trying to sing your name because nobody wants to hear me sing. We have, let's see, I think one other person I see with a hand raised. So I'm going to call on Rebecca Cantor right now, and then I'm going to ask anybody else wants to speak, raise your hand, because if I don't see any other hands raised after Rebecca Cantor finishes, we will move on. Rebecca.
Well, good evening, everyone. My name is Rebecca Cantor. I am a candidate for San Diego Superior Court seat 35. I'm the only Democrat running in that seat in the runoff. And I am excited to tell you a little bit about my campaign. I'm an assistant U.S. attorney. I have been a federal prosecutor, a trial attorney for 15 years now. I graduated from UCLA School of Law. Most of my, after law school and before coming to the U.S. Attorney's Office, I practiced at a civil law firm doing civil and criminal defense for 2 years. Most of my time has been in our major frauds and public corruption sections. So my expertise is in complex white collar crime prosecutions. But I also have served as our office's civil rights coordinator and was a deputy chief in the major crime section where I supervised 10 trial attorneys. I've served as an ethics advisor as a collateral duty in my office for the last 5 years, which I think is very relevant because I think we should expect the highest ethics from our judicial officers. I am currently a judge pro tem, which is a volunteer judge serving in small claims court. And I've been rated well qualified by the San Diego County Bar Association for the role of judge. I have been endorsed by leaders across the county, ranging from Tony Atkins to Nathan Fletcher and Tara Lawson-Remer, to mayors from Catherine Blakespeare to Mayor Gloria and others. I've also been endorsed by the Union Tribune, by the San Diego Imperial County Labor Council, Run Women Run, and many other individuals and organizations. I'm having a campaign kickoff coming up for the general election on August 18th. I know it'll be downtown, it'll be in Old Town, a Cafe Coyote, so a little bit far from East County, but welcome any of you there who would be interested, and I will drop my information in the chat if you'd like to learn more. Thank you so much for the time.
Thank you. Thank you. Our next speaker is Caitlin Tiffany.
Hi, everybody. My name is Caitlin Tiffany, and I'm going to be running for La Mesa Spring Valley School Board in Area 1. Yay. Currently I am an assistant professor at San Diego Mesa College. I also assistant coach the Santana High School dance team. I really like to be active in my community and do what I can to help. So I am serving as a board member on the Community Police Oversight Board here in La Mesa. And the reason I want to run for the La Mesa Spring Valley School Board is because I'm really passionate about student success. And in my work, I am regularly working with stakeholders like family members, other teachers, administrators, and community members to make sure that my students get the support, resources that they need. And I want to be able to act on the board as an advocate for all of the students in La Mesa Spring Valley district. The COVID-19 pandemic has been devastating for education, and I believe that my experience as an educator is going to be an asset when we develop plans that are going to be putting students first, but also supporting teachers and parents, because I believe that every student in the La Mesa Spring Valley School District deserves a 21st century education. So I really hope that I can earn your support. I'm really excited to be running alongside Brianna Costin and Rebecca McCrae. They are running in areas 2 and 3. And this weekend on Saturday, August 6th, Brianna Costin is hosting a campaign kickoff. I will be there, and I hope that you will come to MacArthur Park and support us. And thank you very much for your time. And I hope I see some of you on Saturday.
Thank you, Caitlin. All right, so once again, I see one hand raised. So if anybody else wants to speak, please raise your hand right now. We're going to hear from Max Costin, and then if there are no further hands raised, we will move on. Max, we're ready for you.
Thanks, Mitch. Hi, everyone. Hope you are having a nice day. It really sucks that we can't see each other in person today, but hopefully sometime soon we can get back in person and off of Zoom. I just have some updates about Commissioner Brianna Costin. She's actually in a commission meeting for the La Mesa Planning Commission at the moment, so she isn't able to make it. However, as you did hear, she has her campaign kickoff happening this Saturday at 11 a.m. at MacArthur Park. We would love to have you there. We're going to have some speakers there as well. And it's just going to be an all-around good time. It also doubles as a school supplies drive. So bring some school supplies. We'll be donating those to schools within the district. Just some campaign updates. First of all, we were very excited that we do have the party endorsement. Also, thank you for your club's endorsement. In addition to that, we just recently, in the last couple of days, secured the endorsement of Chair Nathan Fletcher of the San Diego County Board of Supervisors, in addition to Congressman Scott Peters, who has endorsed as of today. So many more endorsements are coming in. We have endorsements from the San Diego Democratic Education Alliance, of course, you guys, and we can't wait to see what community support we have. So again, please join us at the campaign kickoff, or if you can't make it then, join us to canvass, please. We're going to be starting to knock on doors the next day, so Sunday from around 10 a.m. to 12:30 p.m. The other thing is I'm going to drop this again in the chat, but we have our yard signs today. So those who want a yard sign, I'm going to stick a form in the chat who are in the district, and we can drop one off to you. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you very much, Max. All right, so August 6th, MacArthur Park. I will be there, assuming I test positive or negative. I don't want to test positive, one or the other. Anyway, I think we're wrapping up now. You can look for a replay of this meeting very soon on our YouTube channel. Just search for La Mesa-Foothills Democratic Club on YouTube and subscribe while you're there. You can also listen to the podcast, new podcast. We've been having some trouble getting listed on the podcast directories, unfortunately, but look for links to both the video and the podcast on our website, Facebook page, and group and Twitter account, or an email update coming soon. The website is lamesafoothillsdemocraticclub.com, or if that's too much for you to type, lmfdems.com. The Facebook page and group have the same name as the club. We have a page and a group because Facebook is crazy. On Twitter, we're LMFDems, and if you want to sign up for our email updates, go to the website and look for the Get Email Updates link at the top of the page. I think the email updates are the best way to keep on top of what we're doing. Thank you to the board for their hard work doing what they do. Thank you to our guest, Cory Doctorow, to candidates who are running for local office. You guys are the most important of all. Thank you all for spending some of your valuable time with us. Our next meeting is Wednesday, September 7th. We're still working out details on the programming, but I expect it's going to be very focused on giving local candidates platforms and winning your support to get the support of the community. We also still haven't decided on whether you're going to do this on Zoom or in person. Let's just keep our fingers crossed and say it'll be safe to do it in person again. Waiting to see how COVID looks. Thank you very much for staying with us, and we hope to see you soon in real life. Stay healthy, stay sane. Vote blue, no matter who, and we'll see you again soon. Bye now. Good night, everybody.